You are on.
Okay. Well, thank you, and it's nice to meet everybody, and it's great being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. As Catherine mentioned, my name is Brad Wiles. I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I have tonight to talk about a topic, or really it's kind of a grouping of topics that I find absolutely fascinating. I have always had an interest in, I guess, supernatural and kind of occult phenomena and things like that that you encounter through books and movies and television, popular culture and things like that. But I am a relative newcomer to things like Theosophy and various other esoteric currents that have been an essential, if often unacknowledged or sometimes maligned, part of human cultures throughout the world and across history, really. I consider myself very fortunate to have opportunities like this where I can blend my professional, personal, and academic interests in a way that allows me to meet people that I might not otherwise meet, and to engage in stimulating dialogue about topics of common interest, ultimately in the attempt to explore potentially new paths of understanding within and beyond my own scholarly discipline focus. So, just a little bit about me. Heather already mentioned a few of these things, but by trade I'm a librarian and archivist. I've worked in a number of settings for over a decade, so archives, public libraries, academic libraries, now in a corporate setting. And I do that part-time from home, which is nice, so I don't have to be in the office at all, except for at the university. I moved to Milwaukee in August of last year to begin work in the doctoral program at the UWM School of Information Studies. And I'll be finishing my first year of coursework here in the next few weeks, so it's been a pretty exciting time. It's been really busy, since I moved, but it'll be nice to get a bit of a respite this summer. My research interests, as Catherine mentioned, generally involve archives and records administration, information policy, and the role of record keeping in society. And I've been involved as a professional and volunteer with the development and preservation of history and heritage resources at the local and regional level. Right now I'm working on oral history with the Bayview Historical Society, actually, so that's been really exciting to be able to do that. Kind of meet those folks too. And I'm very concerned with the sustainability of cultural institutions, so things like libraries, archives, museums, art galleries, these organizations like this, institutions like this. And I guess in terms of my interest in esotericism, it's really kind of all over the place. But as Catherine also mentioned, I'm a big fan of Victorian literature that's often characterized by that blend of scientific positivism and moralizing Christian certitude, which converged with a renewed interest in spiritualism, mythology, ancient history, and non-Western philosophy and religion in the last half of the 19th century. So obviously, this would include some aspects of Theosophy. That's kind of one of the dominant kind of strands that emerges during that time, and then its offshoots, as well as other intellectual strands that you might find in the writing of people like Sir James Frazer or Ignatius Donnelly and many others. But it's a very large corpus of material, and I feel like I've really just scratched the surface with a lot of it. And just looking around the room, it's just, I can tell that there's just so much that I don't know about it. The ideas that emerged from this era had direct consequences for modern notions of everything from race, class, gender, politics, religion, and many other facets of society, and there has been considerable effort to study this in an empirical and thorough fashion in recent decades through various scholarly lenses. Which brings me to why I'm here. What I hope to do with this presentation and discussion is examine some distinctive esoteric elements of information studies as a scholarly and applied discipline, particularly how it conceives of the increasingly relevant role of information and technology in facilitating human agency and consciousness. Information studies incorporates and refers to, for better or worse, the DIKW pyramid. That's data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And we'll look a little bit at that a little bit closer here shortly. A model that suggests, to me anyway, the workings of a grander framework that could reveal or possibly even enable closer connections between esoteric thought and modern science. So a few caveats about myself, and really this is an invitation to you for your feedback and criticism, and what I hope will be an interactive discussion instead of me just talking at you the whole time. I claim no expertise on esotericism in the broad sense or in any of the traditions or belief systems that could be considered under that broad categorization. I am not an initiate or an adept in any esoteric discipline or school, Western, Eastern, or otherwise, and I am not religious or spiritual really in any formalized way. I don't go to church, I don't pray, And though I don't entirely discount the possibility of a higher power that's either sympathetic, hostile, or indifferent towards the plight of humanity, I don't believe in a god or gods or any other supernatural beings. I mention this for two reasons. First, I'll try to very hard during this discussion to make sure that I do not misrepresent or mischaracterize beliefs or ideas that are complex, wide-ranging, and varied. Indeed, the volume and variety of all that could be considered esoteric is staggering. But if I do lapse, please let me know that is not with the intent to offend anyone or besmirch that belief or idea. It is simply a result of my own ignorance on that particularity, and I welcome any corrections that should occur. Second, I've arrived at my ongoing study of esotericism from a position of intellectual curiosity and without any expectation of rewards beyond fulfilling that curiosity. My personal moral and ethical code and my general approach to the world around me is mostly informed by rational skepticism, which I believe is a valid way of going about your life if you make it a point to keep an open mind, have an empathy for others, and remain curious about the world around you. My skepticism is firmly grounded in opposition to anyone who claims to have all the answers, which I think actually comports very well with the spirit of esotericism and kind of these intellectual strains driving it, at least in the sense that many esoteric traditions offer individuals the possibility of finding their own answers. Though I'm using this as an opportunity to further flesh out some research ideas and some other things that I'm working on. In fact, I want to try to put together a journal article about this. I do not see these kinds of activities in a completely utilitarian sense or as a means to some other end. To me, the journey is the point. Although I may occasionally pause to jot down notes, so if I do that, please bear with me. Because I want to hear what you have to say about this stuff too. That said, here are the main things that I'd like to talk about this evening. First, I want to give a brief primer on information studies, what exactly that is. You tell people that, and it's kind of hard to explain what that is and for people to grasp that if they don't know. In particular, what this looks like as a discipline and the main ideas that drive research and praxis in the field. Next, I'll go over a few aspects of information studies that I believe intersect with or overlap with or sometimes bleed into concepts from the esoteric tradition or with esotericism as an epistemological approach to human knowledge, belief, and what we think to be true about the world around us. Then we'll move on to the DIKW pyramid, what I'm just going to call the knowledge pyramid, because that's kind of what it's most commonly referred to as. And we'll discuss some of its characteristics, uses, and what it might further suggest about linkages between information studies and esotericism as a form of thought, to use Antoine Fauve's terminology. Finally, I'll try to look ahead at some other themes that I think will be essential for information studies to consider as it attempts to balance the humanistic core of the discipline with the technological realities that it must respond to. Okay. So, I hope people can see this, but what I have here is it's kind of a basic model, a visualization or schematic of what IS is, Information Studies. You'll see that it's listed as IS, LIS, and IST, because really what it emerges out of library and information studies. Because 100 years ago, if you needed information, where did you go?
Library.
You went to a library, yeah. So at this point, LIS, or Information Studies, sort of encompasses all these different other iterations, including IST, which is Information Studies or Information Science and Technology. So it's not really IT, information technology per se, it's more about really the systems and kind of what this schematic lays out, which is essentially a linear or kind of a continuum of activity, and with the goal of linking information with users. But you see that it goes both ways. In every instance where someone needs information, there is some sort of a system that you encounter to get it. Whether it's a computer, whether it's a book, whether it's any number of things. There is something that you need to deal with it, and so information itself really is a lot of times it's elusive, or it's complicated, or it can be unavailable largely due to the systems. We don't just have information usually. I mean, it's not something that, unless it is revealed knowledge or some other from some other kind of source, there is a sort of pathway to get there. And so what information studies does is it looks at the relationship between information and users, typically in the context of systems that we've put together to link those two. Within systems, there are sort of these sub-areas or subdomains. These include information retrieval, information policy, and information organization. I included technology on there because that's one of those things that it asserts themselves into all of those areas, into retrieval, into policy, and into organization. So retrieval is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's how do people actually access and get the information, how do they acquire it. Policy are these other things, these rules, regulations, laws, standards, best practices, things like that, that influence information access and information provision. And it can include everything from like cybersecurity to copyright law and things like that. But also just your checkout policies at your local library as well. And organization, that's I'll talk a little bit more about that. That's information organization, but it's also referred to commonly, and there's sort of a sub-discipline of IS called knowledge organization, and I'll come back to that. But that's exactly what it sounds like. It's developing that arrangement and the ability to make all these things work together. And so again, technology is part of that because it asserts itself into all of these other areas. So anybody have any questions about this? All right. So, as I mentioned, knowledge organization, I'll talk about that here in a minute. What I'm interested in looking at, really, in some of my research with this in particular, but also more generally, are some of the elements, characteristics, connections, and relationships of information studies to esoteric thought. And I just want to talk about just a few of them. I think that there's a lot of different areas where this happens, but a few that kind of stick out, I'll just want to talk about here briefly. The first one is knowledge organization. Again, it's kind of information organization, knowledge organization are somewhat interchangeable within information studies. But knowledge organization, they're a very serious, kind of subfield. They have their own journals and professional organizations and all these other things, and they have this mandate of the organization of knowledge from the document level to the societal level. So really looking at a very top view, but also a very granular view of what organization is. So one of the things that informs this subdiscipline is obviously categorization, but there's also the Platonic theory of forms and trying to get down to the essence of things beyond their physical qualities. So for example, we know what a book is, right? We know what it feels like in our hands. We know what it means to read one. But what is the true idea or form of a book? Taking a close and comprehensive look at the facets of this physical thing will help lead you to the truth of what something actually is, what that thing actually is, which is where the real knowledge is, because that knowledge transcends space and time. It's something that you can't really manifest in physical format. As a result, knowledge organization focuses on things like hierarchies and lists and ontologies, and ontologies which are really taxonomies of domain knowledge across domains, I should say. So it seems to me that a connection here is that a similar, within a lot of esoteric traditions, there's a similar preoccupation with this categorization and really trying to organize things and look at things in a hierarchical format, and things like orders of angels and demons, for example. You run across that kind of thing quite a bit. The Hermetic principles, where you have these kind of this list of definitions of what this means, of what Hermetic is driving Hermetic thought. But there's lots of examples. I'm sure that you encounter these frequently, but that part of it, I think, is really, particularly in looking at knowledge organization as something that wants to look at a very, very small level, at a very high level. I think that they are thinking beyond just the material. So, second area, archives and the written record. Now, textual documents are really the primary conveyance of both esoteric and exoteric knowledge since antiquity, really. I know that there was a lot of, particularly in non-Western societies, there was the verbal conveyance of information, but a lot of what we know about what we know is because of the written record at some point. And in fact, archives, they go back, if you look at ancient Sumeria or ancient Egypt, that was one of the important roles, was to document the state, and by documenting the state, you documented also the religion and these other things that came to bear from that kind of elite leadership. As an archivist, I can attest to the revelatory and almost magical quality of the experience when someone finds one bit of information that means everything to them in that moment. I was an archivist in Louisiana, for example, LSU. I worked at a special collections library, and there were instances where people, African American people, would come in, families looking for their history, and when they were able to find something that actually documented, family members, previous owners, or something along those lines, because past a certain point there is no record. So just being able to reveal those things, I think, is something that's very special, and it kind of goes back to that revealed knowledge and the ability to do that. So most of the time, archives, they boil down to records or documents. That's really what they're about. And there's a wide definition of what a document is, and it encompasses many formats, and has grown to include things like rituals, performances, dances, and other more ephemeral cultural representations that you wouldn't typically associate with an archive. The other thing, I guess, is just the root of the word is Greek arche, and that suggests origins or beginnings. And so I think that, and there's lots of words that are based on that, but that's where archives really, derives, I think, its power from, like in its use, and then also the applications. And it's just this, we can't really have, I think that we all have a sense of just how much we don't know, and what has been lost to history simply due to the fact that nobody recorded it or preserved what was there. There's a lot of books and texts and other things that we know existed, not because we have them, but because someone bothered to record information about it. So it was metadata, basically. It was like a catalog record or something else that tells us that. So that's, I think, a very substantial connection. And then finally, it's the materialism and idealism, really the interplay of materialism and idealism, the reciprocal relationship between these two concepts. I happen to think that information is a necessary element of imagination. And I think that within many esoterical lines of thought, the concept of the imagination is very important. It really kind of plays this role, because we need to be able to imagine and sort of internally visualize what the world, or what we want the world to be, what we want ourselves to be. So I think that it's also this materialism and idealism interplay. It's reflected in how knowledge is built, especially in the late modern era, with the influence of technology and consumerism, where everything needs to have some kind of material benefit or output. It's also reflected in how libraries, archives, and other cultural institutions have developed over time. It's this idea that these idealistic ends towards materialistic, or rather materialistic means towards idealistic ends. So it seems a nearly universal esoteric truth that material is not possible without ideation, which I think is also a key element to this. All right. So the knowledge pyramid, the DIKW pyramid, and its discontents. DIKW stands for data, information, knowledge, wisdom. This concept, really, as it exists right now, was formalized around computer science and business information systems from the 1960s to the 1980s. And now you find that it's pretty common. It's just sort of taken as this model that people really can identify with, and it's very useful and all that. So it's very persistent. We'll get to a couple of them here in a minute, but just a lot of people don't like it. It has its number of defenders and detractors, and I think that I can see both both viewpoints on that, but despite its drawbacks, I think that it still offers a useful visualization for information value transfer, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in just a second, especially the value transfer that goes up the pyramid. So it makes use also of a symbol that is both highly esoteric and recognizable. I mean, it's something everybody knows what a pyramid is. Everybody, from the time my kindergarten age, daughter, knows geometrical shapes, so they know what these things are. But the meaning of a pyramid and the use of it is also very, it's used in a lot of ways that people would never have any idea if they didn't have some sort of a, introduction to some of these other esoteric ideas. So there are literally thousands of variations and interpretations out there. There's the food pyramid. Someone mentioned that before, and there's a lot of different things. If you want to really get lost in it, just go to Google Images and type in knowledge pyramid, and you'll see that it's just all over the place. So I don't want to look at thousands of them right now, but I have a couple of examples that we can look through. So are there any Masons in attendance? Okay. So is this, was just one of the images that came up, and it has the Masonic structure, the different degrees. It's kind of fuzzy, so it's hard to tell what these are, but it goes all the way from these, what is that, esteemed apprentice, or entered apprentice?
Entered apprentice.
Yeah, so the 33rd degree. Right. Over there, the Yorkite, up top here, and I think that this might have been one of the visualizations from like a conspiracy theory website, that talked about the Masons controlling the world and all that kind of thing. So anyway, but then I thought this was interesting, the Prison Warder Consciousness, 4th Division. Have you heard of that?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. And then of course the Global Elite sits at the top. So anyway, that's why it leads me to believe it's a little bit dubious in its origins. Okay, so are there any members of the Illuminati or their cooperating satanic bodies? Just figured I have to ask that. I wanted to verify if this was something that, because that's what this purports to represent here is the, and again, this is one of those that you just kind of comes up, and it utilizes that pyramid format to display a fairly convoluted set of information. All right. So how about Russian spies? Are there any Russian spies here today? Okay. So I don't know what this, actually, I got this from a Russian gaming website. And that's the only reason I know it's Russian is because of the Cyrillic alphabet and then the URL down there, the www.64g.ru. If you go there, it's like a Russian gaming website, but there actually are some references to esoteric, because I don't really know what this is. I think this is some kind of a game like Parcheesi or something, or I don't know. But it seems like if maybe if you thought hard enough, you would be able to crack the code on the Russian interference in the election and turn the tide or whatever. I don't know. But it just goes to show you that it has this, the pyramid is obviously this very frequently referenced. It's very flexible. People can apply it to a lot of different scenarios, and that's good, bad, or indifferent. So this is the knowledge pyramid, the DIKW pyramid. Has anybody seen any